Hello and welcome to Focus on Liberia. Welcome to yet another edition of our programs here. Anson is here hosting. Thank you for joining us. Do us that usual favor, share the broadcast with your contact. The topic for today's edition of Focus on Liberia is the state of agriculture in Liberia. We had our president in recent time, a few days ago, to pull a right, who gave the State of the Nation's address in which he gave us his report and talk about all the sectors in Liberia. Agriculture was one of those. Well, talking about agriculture, all of individuals who have been following agriculture in Liberia or agricultural activities in Liberia know that agriculture is one of those areas that we need to pull time in order for us, to make a little heap in the future that we want. To discuss this topic, I have my guest, Mr. Ambula Mambe, who is an international agricultural development practitioner, and he is joining me. And by the way, he wrote a piece talking about agriculture that is entitled, bear with me, what is entitled Hundreds of Millions Spent, but Farm Productivity Falling, Farmers' Losses and Food Insecurity Rising. And that piece is in the New Dawn newspaper. If you have not had the opportunity to read it, you should go and read about it. He did a very good job of giving a comprehensive, concise, and accurate assessment of what agriculture is in Liberia. Let me welcome my guest. Mr. Mambe, it's good to have you. Welcome.
Anthony, it's good to join you and your audience to talk about agriculture in Liberia. I appreciate the thought to invite me, and I'm looking forward to a very interactive discussion.
Thank you so very much. And so getting started here quickly, you said you are an international agricultural development practitioner. Talk to me about that. How did you get the other title? What level of agricultural work or training or studies you've been involved with?
So I studied international agricultural development. I work and implement USAID agriculture and food security program in Ethiopia, in Nicaragua, in Haiti. I also led the implementation of the Food and Agriculture Organization Food for Nutrition program in Ghana. I'm a seaweed ambassador with the Safe Seaweed Coalition.
Okay.
Working to integrate seaweed into the global food system. That's just a little bit of my background. I've implemented multi-million dollars agriculture and food security program in South America and in Africa. And I'm currently also serving as a seaweed ambassador, working with the Global Safe Seaweed Coalition and the Lord Restore Foundation and the United Nations Global Impact on how we can integrate seaweed into the global food system, both for economic purpose, but also for environmental purpose. So that's the background I bring to the discussion. And I'm looking forward to more interaction with the specifics on Liberia.
Thank you so very much. Talking about specifics on Liberia, that is what exactly we're going to do here. And so, folks, if you are just joining us, we want to say welcome to Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Mr. Mambe, your piece, you lay out 7 bullet points, if I can pull it that way, that you explain further, talking about the state of agriculture in Liberia. Before we go into that piece, allow me to do this in one word, if you may, or a few words. Knowing what you know about agriculture in Liberia, what will you say is the state of Liberia's agriculture?
This Liberia agriculture has been abandoned
Okay.
and it is failing. Food insecurity and poor nutrition rising while farmers are struggling to make profits when they invest their time and resources in Liberia agriculture. So to answer your question in one word, the sector is abandoned. To answer it in two words, the sector is abandoned and it is failing.
Thank you. You said the sector is abandoned, but in your piece that you wrote that we're going to spend some time on for us to understand the state of Liberia's agriculture, you talk about over $1 billion that have been spent since the war in Liberia. I don't think that sector is abandoned when over a billion of the, $1 billion that have been spent into that sector. That is not an abandoned sector. So tell me, when you said abandoned, what do you mean?
So the time frame we actually pulled the data point from was from the actual data point there is from 2017.
Okay.
The $1 billion comes from after the war, and that is just an anecdotal, presentation of what we've been hearing.
Okay.
But when we're talking about agriculture being abandoned, we're talking about being abandoned in the context of the government taking her responsibility to drive transformation.
Right.
We are saying the government has abandoned agriculture, has abandoned her responsibilities in agriculture to an army of NGO flying across the country.
Okay.
And depending almost exclusively, and we'll go into the details on that when we look at the numbers, relying almost exclusively on short-term NGO projects and multilateral grants and loans. Our experience with agriculture globally and in Africa and other parts of the world has proven that NGOs are good partners, and I work with them. NGOs are good partners. Multilateral loans are good, but they cannot, on their own, as we are doing in Liberia, drive the transformation of the sector to the extent that the sector provides what it is known to do best, and that is to address significant and chronic poverty, increase food security, and spur general growth and development. That is the strength of agriculture across the world. And the evidence shows that relying on short-term projects, most of which sometimes or often all the times are not aligned with the challenges on the ground, because most of these projects are designed outside Liberia. Relying on them cannot undo the challenges, cannot fix the problem. So when we say agriculture is abandoned, we speak about it being abandoned in the context of the government leaving her responsibility to NGOs whose intervention we have seen years over years are basically addressing the symptoms of the problem and not addressing the root causes of the problem. So the billions of dollars flowing into the sector over the period of time, to be honest to the NGOs and our partners, they've been doing well in diagnosing the problem in some instances and only treating the symptoms of those problems, leaving the root causes of those problems unresolved over time. And that is the abandonment we talk about.
Thank you. So we know the government should be regulating that sector. And over 1 billion being spent mostly through these NGOs. And according to your article, a great percentage of this particular money we're talking about is in grant that we don't have to pay back. Can we say this abandonment that you talk about cannot only be on government shoulders, or can we say it is the government because the government is the one that is now regulating and talking about these NGOs? If they have been doing a pretty good job for the time period, at least we should be in a much better place. But the records that you provided or suggest otherwise. So the question is, can we hold both the government and the NGOs who have been Liberia's partners accountable for this abandonment and failure?
The agriculture sector is multi-sectorial. It's connected beyond just agriculture.
Okay.
It requires funding from the Ministry of Finance.
Mm-hmm.
It requires policy enforcement. It requires policies formulation from the legislature. It requires significant oversight from civil society and even agriculturalists like farmers.
Mm-hmm.
So if the sector is failing today, we cannot put the blame squarely on NGOs' intervention. It wouldn't be fair to them.
Okay.
We put the responsibility of the failure of the agriculture sector because the NGOs are coming to help.
Mm-hmm.
And the evidence shows to what extent they can help and to what extent they cannot help. The government should know that. We are saying the failure of the sector is squarely the responsibility of the government. And that is why we pick this with the government and say the government has abandoned the sector to the NGOs. The NGOs are playing their role, but their role can only do so much. They can only address symptoms of agricultural development challenges. They cannot address the root causes. The root causes are structural that only the government can address, or the government can address with the help of these NGOs. We can go into the details on how the government can revise and do a rethinking of our approach to agriculture that NGOs' intervention can enhance and help to improve the sector to be able to achieve what we know it can do.
All right, let us do an assessment, something you did in your article, and then get to know how this sector is looking as we speak. Now, you wrote, Liberia still produces less than half, 0.2% cup of rice per Liberian per day after spending hundreds of millions on projects to be self-sufficient in rice production. So Liberia is now producing rice despite hundreds of millions that have been spent. What is responsible for that?
Agricultural productivity is low. What we did basically was just to check and see all the production of rice in the country over the period of time, that is from 2006 to 2020. If you add all the production of rice to all the production of rice in Liberia, assuming that nothing is wasted, and you divide it by the number of people, the country can only produce less than half a cup of rice per Liberian per day. And the reason, like I said, is because productivity is low. When I say productivity is low, what I mean is in Liberia, when a rice farmer, and we went down further into that, a rice farmer in Liberia, when rice farmer in Liberia, the same hectare or acre of land a rice farmer uses to produce rice in Liberia, if that rice is produced, if that farm is producing, say for example, 10 bags of rice, when in fact it should be producing around 25 bags of rice, right next to Sierra Leone, the same farmer on the same acre of land is producing around 15 or 20 bags of rice. Part of the reason why that is happening is because the farmers do not have access to fertilizers. Even if they do have access to fertilizers, the appropriate application of fertilizer to be able to improve yield, the skill set, the strategy on the application of fertilizer to be able to improve yield, the farmers are lacking knowledge. Besides that, even the rice seeds, there are varieties of rice seeds that can spread up productivity. Farmers do not have access to rice seeds. How do they have access to rice seeds and farmer? Rely on how the government structure the agriculture input market such that private sector actors can provide these seeds or these fertilizers to farmer. And the seeds and fertilizers provided to farmer are supervised and regulated and certified by the government so that they cannot be counterfeit seeds and counterfeit fertilizers. What is happening in Liberia today? Over 70%, in fact, it is 96% of farmers in Liberia rely on seeds and fertilizers that come through the country through the borders of Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Ivory Coast. These seeds and fertilizers that are coming in, they are not regulated. Therefore, 80 to 90% of them are counterfeit seeds and counterfeit fertilizers. So when farmers apply them to their land and cultivate over the period of time for harvest, productivity is low and the harvest quantity is low. So access to seed, access to fertilizer, access to agriculture knowledge, that is the extension part of it, access to agricultural knowledge and agriculture training on the appropriate application of fertilizers remains the problem, remains the root cause for the low productivity. The second,
and Mr. Mambe, before you continue, and if you, I'm sure you did a comparison, right, with Ivory Coast, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. All of the things that you listed that Liberian farmers either don't have access to or sufficient or the fact that they don't even have all the necessary training and skills to carry on a better production. It said that farmers in the other countries, the neighboring countries, have these things. They're in a better situation with these things compared to Liberia. Is that can that be a reason?
obviously, yes. They're not 100%. But when you look at the agricultural productivity number and you look at how government has instituted specific policy to open up agriculture market and how government own intervention is well organized, predictable, then you come to the realization that the lacking of these structures in the Liberia sector is responsible for the low productivity. But beyond that, there's something important that I wanted to highlight. There's this myth in Liberia that our soil is so good that we don't even need fertilizer. That's a myth.
Okay.
That's a complete myth. And I feel it is embarrassing to see the president of the country state that publicly, that our soil is so good. Now, I'm not saying that Liberia's soil is so bad that it cannot, be used for agricultural production. What I'm saying is the evidence is contrary to the perception that the soil is so good. The evidence, and I can refer you to them.
But Mr. Mambe, the soil have been good over the years. I grew up in a village. My parent family, they made farm. We had sufficient for ourselves. I know that the soil is not as good as we, say it is, right? But it is good to understand that we can engage in serious production. Many years ago, people said Lofa was a bread basket. I'm not sure if they were using sufficient fertilizer at the time. And my question here is that could it also be that our neighbors who are farmers are putting in more time, are more disciplined, are more connected, or committed to farming? Do they see farming as a profession, as a career, and they take it serious more than we Liberians do? Could that also be a reason? Because sometimes the excuses that government is not doing, the land is there, government not taking land from anybody.
So let me tell you something. You see,
okay.
farming is not about just being committed. Farming is a business.
Okay.
When you invest your time and resources into the business over the period of time, you expect to yield profit. If the structure that should be able to enhance that process of profit making by the farmer is not working, then it's a disincentive for the farmer to be engaged into agriculture. That's the reason why you see mass exodus of people leaving agriculture and focusing either on artisanal mining. You see the young people leaving, because agriculture in itself is labor intensive. If people spend whole length of time into the production process and cannot get the yield that they require, then it becomes problematic and a disincentive for them to continue. That's where the government takes responsibility. The land is there, but the system that ensures unlimited or unrestricted access to the required inputs that the farmer need to be able to change the land into agricultural products is lacking. So because it is lacking and the farmer take time and do what they can do and cannot get the yield over time, it disincentivizes the process of going back to agriculture the next time. So the young people are now focused more on artisanal mining. They are focused on riding motorbikes, and they are focused in other activities that can give them quick money as compared to investing in agriculture, which can even double what they are doing with their artisanal mining and their motorbike riding if the right process is put in place to ensure those hurdles are addressed. The soil issue I was talking about is very important because we've lived with this myth. Most of what we did in the past were not sustainable now. What we were doing in the past is we were relying mostly on shifting cultivation. And that's the reason why you were calling places breadbasket. The population was small, the land space was very wide. So if you cultivate on one farmland today, the next year you move to another farm here when the nutrients in that particular soil are depleted. That's what our parents were doing. They cultivate on this farmland today, they move to another farmland the next year, they move to another farmland the other year. So they were extracting nutrients as they were moving from one farmland to another. Under the current system, that is not sustainable for two reasons. Population is increasing. Besides that, government has increased investment in mega production, in mega farms. So you have the golden beryllium, you have the equatorial palm oil, and a lot of these large concessions, rubber plantations taking most of the land. Farmers themselves, even land owners, are protecting their land for different purposes. Land has become an issue. So for that reason, what you need is not an expansion of the production land. You need productivity of small land. So when you say productivity of small land, what we mean is 1 hectare of land, if it is able to produce 30 bags of rice, when you apply the best nutrients and the best method of cultivation, use it rather than going to acquire 15 hectares of land to produce the same quantity of rice.
Thank you.
And for that to happen, critical policies need to be taken to be able to get farmers the right access, unlimited access to the inputs they need to increase productivity. Agricultural productivity is our problem, and the structure of government required to produce the inputs that farmers need to increase productivity are not functional. If you go to the World Bank report, when you go down in the article further, you will see what the World Bank report spoke about, how our system has failed with regards to structuring agricultural businesses.
So I want you to do the analysis here. Let's look at how the Liberian government regulates agricultural activities in Liberia, or how the Liberian government handles agricultural activity, sees the agricultural sector as a sector to create jobs and provide food, and boost economic activities. How the Liberian government sees the agricultural sector and what it does compared to any of our neighbors. And then you compare that with what the West does, because we continue to hear this, in Western world, the government only subsidize the farmers. The farmers carry on, the agricultural activity, carry on the farming. Do the analysis for us to understand where we are as a country.
The first thing is, let's take Liberia investment as a country in agriculture.
Okay.
That would tell you whether the government is committed to its pledge of supporting agriculture.
Okay.
If you see the spread that I did, and it is not just an indictment on the WIA administration, it's a historical issue from the Salif administration coming down forward. Of the almost $1 billion invested in the sector over time, only 4% of that amount was provided by the government of Liberia through government budget. You get it?
Yeah.
43% of that amount was loan and 39 grant. Now, the thing about the loan, somebody will ask and say, but if the loan and the grant are still coming towards each other, they're not almost the same thing. No, that's not the same thing.
Okay.
The projects through which those loans and grants are disbursed are projects designed by the donors. The priorities in the projects are designed by the donor and presented to the government. In the projects, you see that they say align to government development agenda, but there are many misalignments. One I will highlight: when the current Minister of Agriculture took over, she made suites of projects, and she insisted that the costing of those projects, and we supported her on that. She argued that the costing of the projects and the priorities outlined in the projects, that was the African Development Bank project. She said the costing of the projects and the priorities that were outlined in those projects, in that particular project, were misaligned. For example, the African Development Bank were proposing the purchase of large tractors, few large tractors. We supported the agriculture minister in arguing that we have almost 85 to 90% of our farmers, smallholder farmers, operating on 3, 4, 5 hectares of land. They don't need large machineries. They need small machineries to help them sprout their land, and there are options to doing that. So she argued that the large tractors they were providing were not suitable for the current situation in Liberia. The second thing she argued was some of the machines they had suggested to be procured were not absolutely not needed. The priority, she said in her argument, and we supported, was the farmer needs seeds. How will you give somebody a machine to plow a land when the person don't even have seeds to plant?
Okay.
So that is a classic example of how these projects designed outside Liberia are misaligned with the priorities and the challenges on the ground. So, because they are not aligned neatly with the priorities and challenges on the ground, when they are implemented, they tend to not address the problem. Meanwhile, the resources are spent, and it becomes our responsibility and the responsibility of future Liberians to pay. So, what can be done to reorient that process is for the government to design her own program, lead the process of transformation, not by providing only 5% of the cost responsible for agricultural transformation, just 4%. There's a saying that says you put your money where your mouth is. That we have agreed as a country, and there is no argument on this in the development cycle or over globally, whether it's in China, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Africa, no country in the world has ever led a successful poverty reduction economic growth process outside of transforming agriculture. No country in the world. So since we have agreed on that, and there's a reason, not just because agriculture is a magic wing, I can go into the details later. Since we have agreed on that, why don't we put money into agriculture to be able to address poverty? We have over 65% of our people working in agriculture or living directly on agriculture. Why don't we do it? For your comparative analysis you wanted to draw, to speak to specifics on that, when Ethiopia decided and concluded that to be able to lift Ethiopians out of poverty over a period of time, and even Rwanda, what it did was they designed their development agenda. Ethiopia named her development agenda agriculture-led growth for development. So the emphasis was on agriculture. What she did was, she said there are two things all around to be able to increase agricultural productivity, basically saying to be able to increase production on the size of land. Farmers need access to inputs. They need access to seeds. They need access to fertilizers. Ethiopia said they designed a comprehensive fertilizer policy and strategy, costed that policy over time, and estimated how long it will last. Targeted people who are in most need of the fertilizer. They conducted a comprehensive soil survey of the entire Ethiopia to determine the nutrients need of the soil in different regions. The soil in Nima is different from the soil in Magibi. The soil in Magibi is different from the soil in Lofa. You cannot just bring NPK fertilizer, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium fertilizer and spray it across the entire country. Soil is like human being. Before you take medication, you must be diagnosed. If your head is hurting, you might probably be suffering from low water in your body. If my head is hurting, it must be maybe because of pressure. The treatment for you for your head hurting cannot be the treatment for me for my head hurting. So when there is nutrients deficiency in the soil in Liberia, it doesn't mean the same nutrient deficiency in Nema is the same nutrient deficiency in Magibi, is the same nutrient deficiency in Bapuru. What the government is currently doing is the government brings in one set of fertilizer and distribute to all farmers as if all the farmers having the same problem. In Ethiopia, before they could move into the fertilizer industry, they conducted a comprehensive soil survey and determined the nutrients need of the soil in different regions. Some soil needed more nitrogen fertilizer. Some soil needed only mineral, only phosphorus fertilizer. Some soil did not even need nitrogen or phosphorus fertilizer. They need macronutrients inputs. After they made that determination, then they determine what quantity of specific fertilizer they will need for the different regions. They identify an international supplier and use the supplier to say, we as a government will be able to procure this quantity over the period of time. By doing that, what the government of Ethiopia did was, the government of Ethiopia identified the need of fertilizer for the country, the specific need per region. The government identified how much of that need she can address. By doing that, the private sector identified a gap and said, but then if the government needs maybe 10 metric tons of fertilizer and can only produce 5, there is a business opportunity for 5 additional metric tons in Ethiopia that our private sector investor can invest into. If Liberia does that, if we identify the nutrients need of the soil across the country, and the government design a comprehensive policy towards its own support towards addressing that, and identify that gap that the government cannot support, private sector might likely come in and say, oh, but then there is a gap I've already identified. The government can produce this cannot be produced, and I as a private sector will establish my business to do it. But for the private sector to do that, the enabling environment must be created. That is where the problem now is in Liberia. The World Bank has rated Liberia as the worst country in the world for farmers to do their business.
And how did the World Bank come up with that, or report? What informed that report or that decision or that conclusion that Liberia is the worst place, to do business in terms of agriculture?
The Enabling Agriculture Business Report captures several triggers of business environment, several indicators of business environment improvements.
Okay.
The government, all the government that they engage, agree in advance, the same way the MCC report is. The fight against corruption. These are the indicators we will measure over time. Transparency, accountability. These are the indicators we measure over time. So year after year, they only go back to see whether those indicators have been met. Say, for example, do you have a seed policy as a government? Have you been able to identify and quantify the seed needs for Liberian farmers across maybe 3 or 4 major value chains? Maybe rice, maybe cocoa, or maybe cassava, or whatever value chain you will determine as a priority value chain. Have you been able to determine the actual quantity, to project the actual quantity that your country needs? Have you been able to come up with a government policy on how the government will intervene and what the gap will be, for which private sector will say, okay, since government will be able to provide this and this will be lacking, I can come in and provide it. What the government does instead is on a sporadic basis. when campaign is approaching, or when somebody have interest in certain country, they request the president, they put money in the budget, they buy fertilizer, with all knowing the nutrients need of the soil. The agricultural minister goes in the community and divide fertilizers on the farmers. What
Mr.
that does is what
Mr.
that
Mambet, may I interrupt you there? One, I would say this might be the major aspect of it. Individuals, farmers,
yeah, I'm listening.
Liberians, or Liberian business people who probably have understanding that agriculture in itself is a part of a business sectors. Could one of our problems be that we don't have farmers, we don't have Liberians, we don't have trained agriculturists who are prepared to go into this sector and see this sector as one of the sectors that we all need to invest in? Is that not any of our problems at all? Is there not any deficiency, when it comes to individuals who want to go into this sector? Don't you think we have problem there also?
We have problem. We have, like I said, the problem is complex.
Okay.
The problem is complex, but every problem has root. And for me, with my training, I always like to emphasize the root cause analysis. Every problem has root, and to be able to address some of the root causes of those problems, you have to go to the root. And it comes back to the point I raised earlier. NGO short-term problems don't address the root cause problem in most instances. You are saying Liberian farmers or Liberians don't want to invest in the sector. I don't disagree. Liberians are investing in some instances. They are facing challenges. Some Liberians have not seen the need to invest. I don't want to rule that out as part of the problem. My emphasis here is the root cause of the problem, like the World Bank identified in her report, is the failure for the government to create an enabling environment for those investments to happen. The investment will not happen, or will not happen at the scale required, when the enabling environment is not created. Who creates the enabling environment and ensure it is operationally effective is the government.
So how can the government create the enabling environment that it has not been able to create? That's what I'm learning from you. How can the government do that?
There are several ways the government can do it. One way the government can do it is through policy formulation and policy enforcement.
Okay.
Where is, like I said, take for example, seed. Donor resources and government should be able to identify through policy formulation the actual needs of Liberian farmers, of the Liberian agricultural sector, in terms of seed, in terms of fertilizer, in terms of other inputs and machinery. Government policies should be targeted. Government policies should be aligned such that it says what role government will play in addressing those problems and what gap is left. The second way government can address that is for the government to make intentional incentives for private sector to operate. For private sector to operate, and for government to make her intervention known. The fertilizer industry, for example, in Liberia, I want to keep referencing. You wouldn't want to come and invest and bring your fertilizers to sell, and without knowing, in less than 2 months, government buys fertilizer and flood the market with fertilizer. You get it?
I get it. I think you have addressed the issue of fertilizer very sufficiently when you were making a comparison with Ethiopia there. Let's talk about the issue of subsidy and funding, right? Has the government of Liberia been in a position to provide subsidy to farmers in this sector? How has that helped in any way? Your research showed that money pretty much has not been that much of a problem. If you look at over $1 billion being spent in this sector, I'm not saying that has been too much money, but there have been, enough money for us to be at a much more productivity or productive level than we are right now. So let's talk about funding. Has funding been the problem? Has what you call a subsidy been lacking to motivate and encourage farmers to go into agriculture?
So subsidy is a whole big thing.
Okay.
And you want to be careful how you talk about subsidy, because
Mhm.
subsidy, if they are not organized well, they tend to be disruptive.
Mhm.
And when they are introduced and disrupt market operation over time and cannot be maintained, then you further subject the farmer to hardship. What do I mean by that is, if government doesn't plan a subsidy program well and introduces some subsidy intervention, it scares away market actors because they say the government is involved. So even if I go there, the government is providing the subsidy, right? The
Okay.
government is
Mhm.
providing what the farmer needs, at least for now. So if I go there, I might be losing. So private sector will scare away. Now, if government doesn't maintain it over time, then the farmers are kept into a situation where government cannot provide and private actors cannot provide. So subsidy is good, but subsidy can be better when they are structured, when they are predictable, and when they are targeting those who really need them. So government has been providing subsidies. The subsidy I know government provides in Liberia over a period of time, fertilizer subsidy. The problem with that subsidy is the fertilizer is going to farmers who don't know whether their soil actually need the fertilizer. So in that instance, the subsidy is there, but the subsidy is not addressing the problem, because the farmer received the fertilizer subsidy, apply it to their soil, but probably their soil doesn't need it, or their soil doesn't need that much
All right.
of fertilizers. So subsidy is good when they are targeted. Subsidy is good when they are addressing the root causes of the problem. Subsidy is good when the private sector is aware of what time government is coming in with subsidy, how much subsidy is government coming in with, and what is left outside as market opportunity for their investment, so that the subsidy is not disrupted. Now, subsidy is a complex issue. You want to be very careful how you do it so that it doesn't create more problem than it tries to address problem. Regarding financing, like I said, government spent less than 4% over the last 3 years, less than 4% of the total money in the sector, on her own sector that she determined to be a priority for economic development. It's less than 4%. And relying on projects that in most instances are not aligned with the priorities and the challenges on the ground. That is the problem. That is why agriculture is failing. That is why we say the sector is abandoned.
All right. Let's talk about something you said or you wrote. The African Union has consistently ranked Liberia not on track to transforming its agricultural sector. Liberia failed 22 out of 24 progress indicators in AU latest report. And there's something I need to show you here, which is this graph. We're looking at cassava. Ghana is at 17,000. Rice, Ghana is at 22. Now, if you compare Ghana with Liberia for cassava, Ghana is 17,000, Liberia is 7,000. If we compare that Ghana with Liberia in terms of rice, Ghana is 2,000, Liberia is at 1,000. And this is our staple here. Now you go to Ivory Coast. And if you do the comparison there, as the graph shows, Liberia is lacking behind, nearly all her neighbors.
Sure. And that's the reason why the African Union said, as part of her report, and that's been a consistent report, that Liberia is just completely off track to transforming our agricultural sector. Completely off track. She measured several indicators to be able to come to that conclusion. Key among the indicators, like the 24 indicators I told you about, only passed through.
Right.
Key of the indicator is rather accountability for action and results in the agriculture sector. We fail. And we fail the previous report, we fail the current report on accountability for action and result. I'm talking about accountability for action and result. It's not only about financial accountability. We'll come to that. Another thing we fail in is we fail measurably. We lack the capacity to engage into evidence-based agricultural intervention. Most of our intervention we engage into are not informed by evidence. They are informed by emotions. They are informed by people's personal political interest. And over time, they are not assessed to determine whether they made the impact or not. But then we source additional funding to come and do the same thing. So the African Union captured that our approach to agriculture is not informed by evidence. After we engage with our evidence, we are not making any frantic effort to review the outcome of our intervention. We are not accountable for results of our action. So because they do not have funding almost always all the time ready, and they're ready to push it to Liberia and other countries, we implement these projects. We don't intentionally evaluate them or the government intervention to say, these are the lessons we learned. This is why it failed. And in the development field, failure is not a completely bad thing. People keep shying away from speaking about their failures. If you execute a development intervention and it fails, that is an opportunity to learn. You must be able to identify and document why it failed and how you can prevent it the next time.
Mr. Marvin, may I hasten to ask, do we as a country have an agricultural plan? I mean, do we have a plan that will make us self-sufficient, that will make agriculture in Liberia to be an industrial sector to create? Do we have a plan? Do you know?
I have seen several plans.
Okay.
I have seen several plans. To be honest, I have seen several plans. The fundamental problem with those plans, and part of the reason why those plans are not implemented, or when they are implemented in piecemeal, they failed, is because the formulation of the plan, the foundation on which the plans are established, is futile. There is a process of formulating agricultural development plan that we always bypass. Critical to that process is creating stakeholder ownership of the plan. Agriculture is a critical sector. It's multi-sectorial. It requires the support from the legislature. It requires the support from the civil society. It requires the support from the media. It requires the support from the private sector. So when you are developing an agricultural plan that should be successful, that plan must take into a comprehensive participation of those key actors. They must participate such that they are aware and understand the challenges that the plan seeks to address. They must be convinced that the intervention pathway identified in those plans and the costs associated with them are reliable and can achieve the goal. When you do that, and it comes to the point where you try to solicit funding, whether from the legislature or the Minister of Finance, for the implementation of such plan, it becomes easy because everybody is on the same path. Civil society is aware of the problem. They are convinced that the problem, the proposals identified can address them, and the cost associated will be able to achieve the goal. The legislature convinced so that they can make the allotments, and the president will become the champion of that plan. Unfortunately, that's not happening in Liberia. I saw the Liberia agriculture plan costed, but the plan was only structured for 3 years. Who will want to invest if a private actor is looking at your agricultural plan who will want to invest billions of dollars in a sector whose plan is only for 3 years. And you cannot predict after 3 years what will be the position of the government. That in itself is a disincentive for somebody to want to invest.
So, how is not having an appreciable plan, a robust plan, a hindrance to, say, an investor who knows Liberia's staple is rice and comes to Liberia and negotiates with the Liberian government, say, look, I want to engage in mass production. How is not having a plan up to international standard that is relevant to our sector? How is that a problem to that businessman coming and say, look, I have the money, I have the equipment, I have the skills or the literature to train people, and I'm going into agriculture? How is that a problem?
Good. This is the problem. You know the history of rice and politics and conflict in Liberia.
Mm-hmm.
You know that.
I do.
Government, and that's my disappointment in we are, and I will come to that later. Government over time, just to answer your question specifically, what the private sector actor will be wanting from government is, can you allow me, can you create for me the enabling environment to do this? Because there is cheap or relatively less expensive rice coming from India.
Mm-hmm.
that the government prefers to import so that rice can be on the market all the time, out of fear that if there is a shortage, there will be a political uprising against the government. So government is not trying to take a risk with the rice sector. They prefer to import the rice that is already ready rather than allowing an investment into the rice value chain. Because when there is the cheap import of rice coming outside, obviously if you're producing rice in Liberia, it might be maybe $1 or 50 cents or maybe 25 cents more expensive. Probably, I'm not speaking with the specifics. It might be, of the same quality. There are rice all around locally produced in Monrovia and stuff. But when we were there, we observed that the quality was low. They got rocks in it, they got sand in it. The taste was not too strong. People did not like it. So for that reason, if you want to produce rice to the quantity, to the quality of what is coming from outside Liberia,
right,
the price of that rice might be maybe 25 cents more than the rice imported. The government is afraid.
How come when there's not much attached to this production in terms of transportation, the one coming from India, they're using ship, that's a huge cost of transportation. So how will local production end up being a little more expensive than production done overseas and then transported and then duties free, fees and all that? So
economy of scale.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why the rice from India
mm-hmm.
would be relatively less expensive
mm-hmm.
than the rice in Liberia is because of economy of scale. I will explain that. But the point I was making was,
mm-hmm.
I will come to that, but the point I was making was, government is afraid to take that risk. And that risk normally doesn't last forever. It lasts for a short period of time for that private investment to take root, manage some of her losses, and then gradually you observe that the curve will go up, the price will go up, it will reach to a point where it comes down. Because of economy of scale in Liberia, the price of rice might drop over a period of time. That period where it goes up is where the government is afraid to take the risks out of the political consequences.
That's something that the government is not willing to create, the opportunity where the market forces, all right, or the importers and the producers will compete to lead to a reduction in price.
To create some level of protection in the short to medium term
mm-hmm.
for a little bit high price of rice and eventually falls. That period where there might be a late increase in rice, government is afraid that opposition will use that period to put the people against them. So for that reason, government is fixed to a decision that will import cheap rice.
So how do we get to this self-sufficient, in terms of production?
So answering your question about how the rice in India might be less expensive, relatively less expensive than the one in Liberia. Economic skill. What happened in India is massive production. So the cost of producing one bag of rice is far less if the person is producing 300 million with the same machinery. One machine, for example, is producing 300 million of rice, bags of rice. The unit cost of production for one bag using that machine would be less than if that same machine is in Liberia but only producing 1 million. You got it?
No, how come?
If one machine, still identical machine, costing you maybe $1 million for that machine, that machine is producing 100 million bags of rice.
And that same machine is producing 300 million bags of rice somewhere. You are saying the one that producing 1 million or 2 million bags less will cost more?
The cost of producing the rice, right? To be simplistic, let you see.
Because the time period will not be the same. If the time period were the same, I would say maybe it makes sense to me.
Exactly. Let you simple numbers. The total cost of producing 10 bags of rice in China is $1. The total cost of producing 10 bags of rice in Liberia is $3.
$3.
So the cost for one bag of rice, because India is producing it for $1 for 10 bags, India can even sell one bag for 50 cents. And she will still make profit. In Liberia, you're spending $10. You're spending $10 to produce 10 bags of rice, so that $1 per rice, $1 per rice, $1 per bag, $1 per bag. So you must sell that rice for at least $1.50 to be able to make profit, because you spend $1 to produce it. In India, India is only spending 25 cents to produce one, because India is not only producing 10. India is producing 500 with the same machine you're using to produce 10.
Right.
So the economy of scale there is India is using the same input you're using, but India is producing more than you're producing. So for that reason, India can spread her costs on the more that she produce and sell less than you can only sell at the price where you're able to produce. Government is now willing to take that risk with rice production in Liberia, such that there can be a little bit of increase in the price for a period of time, and then eventually that price falls. That period where the price will go up is where the government is afraid and doesn't want to commit. And because of that, private sector don't want to come and invest. While they are investing to produce rice, then cheap rice is coming from India and distorting the market for them, and they cannot make profit.
But talking about that, right? I know I don't want to go back to the subsidy thing, so let me leave it, because if government is subsidizing the importation, right, that will lead to a reduction in the price of importation. But if the government decide not to subsidize importation and government decide to subsidize local production, that means the government is giving preference to local production. In essence, either local production and importation will be at the same price, and we want to be able to be self-sufficient in food production. Because that is the one that will create more jobs than just importation that come through the free page, a few person downloading it.
Exactly. You are absolutely right. Now, government doesn't want to take, because before the rice cultivated and gets to the bag and gets to the market, it would take maybe for the company to come.
But you're not going to stop importation though, because you know you need time to grow the rice and you need time to clean it.
The private sector will need some level of commitment from the government on some level of protection.
Okay.
That after production, you will start certain level, certain amount, certain quantity of rice input. They need that commitment, because at that point in time, their rice will be coming on the market. The price might be a little bit high, but eventually will fall. The time the price will be high is where government cannot afford that 6 months or that 1 year of additional $1 on the price of rice, government thinks that opposition will use that to unseat it.
All right.
That's the fear. So the solution, is, part of the solution is smallholder production across the country. Small farmers producing across the country. Create an environment where the private sector or even the government will make available for them the quality of rice varieties they need, the seeds that they need, the fertilizer that they need to buy. And in the event where extremely poor farmers cannot buy, government can intervene through subsidy for those farmers to produce. And you don't have to worry about a meager production coming into the country that only needs protection to be able to engage in the production. It can be the mix of two, but like I said to you, government is afraid to take the risks. Government feel comfortable inputting the rice, so government will continue to input the rice.
All right, let's take a short break. When we come back, we will be winding down. Because of time, I just hit the 1 hour mark. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jar.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm Anthony here hosting. This is Focus on Liberia. The topic we're discussing today, the state of agriculture in Liberia. My guest is Ambula Mambe, International Agricultural Development Practitioner. If you are just joining us, we want to say welcome. But man, time is fast spent. We have to leave it there, but I have to roll in this. We hear about this Mapuka Declaration that is asking almost all African countries to spend a certain percentage of their budget on agriculture so that Africa and their country can become food sufficient, right? Talk to me about that. My understanding is that our government is now reaching this threshold. What does it say about our government and our leaders' seriousness about this agriculture? Because when you listen to them, they say, well, this is our springboard out of poverty. This is our springboard to growing the economy. This is our springboard to creating all the jobs opportunity. Let's talk about that quickly. What do you know?
Previous government, current government have never lived up to the 10% requirement. It's a 10% of your budget. At least 10% of your budget should be directed towards agricultural development. That has not happened. The finance minister recently said the government is not doing it because the donors are bringing the money. That was his response. He said the NGOs, the donors are bringing money. They're implementing projects all around. So government will focus on something different. That in itself was naive, because what it communicates is, if you say this thing is your springboard, like the word you use out of poverty, then you must be able to invest in it so other people can see. And the type of investment you're doing is completely different or almost different from what these NGOs are doing in 36 months, 1 year, going across the country. It's completely different. So those are two different things. We have not been able to live to the commitment. But besides what the declaration says, go back to the report from the declaration. Every country that has ever increased or lived up to that declaration have been able to live for people out of poverty. Rwanda did it. Ghana did it. Ethiopia did it. And they were able to lift their people from poverty. They committed to the declaration. They spent at least 10% or even more than 10%, and they were able to move themselves into a middle-income country. And today they are a better transformed economy than Liberia. That's what we need to do.
And for your closing, we want you to give the State of the Nation's address on Liberia agriculture. Talk about what the problem is, where we are, and then your recommendation. That's your closing.
Liberia agriculture It's abandoned. The sector is failing. Farmers are struggling with low productivity. Access to critical inputs are lacking. When they are available, they are either counterfeit or substandard, unregulated. Market opportunities or market structure, the enabling environment for market is almost non-existent. The World Bank has said we are the worst place in the world for farmers to be able to establish their business. Government has turned us back on investing in agriculture and relying almost entirely on short-term NGO projects across the country. These projects the NGOs provide are addressing the symptoms of our agricultural development programs, challenges rather, but they are not addressing the root causes of those problems. What we need is NGO partnership that help us diagnose our problem, and while they are addressing the symptoms, we put into place a comprehensive strategy that can be predictable by private sector actors and increase their confidence for investment, while government address the challenges that are faced by other farmers who are extremely poor and cannot afford access to those inputs to improve their market, to improve their production over time. And private sector can lead the process toward addressing those who can provide while we move into agricultural transformation. The president, the legislature, the minister of finance, the civil society, and you guys in the media need to work together to continue to push and advocate for agricultural transformation. The sector is political, the sector needs support, and the sector needs champion. That's the reason why when they appointed the agriculture minister, I said she was a good lady, she was a professional, but she was not the best fit for the agriculture minister position with the current challenges we face. She went to the Senate confirmation and said the politicians should give her a chance to do her work. Agriculture ministers should be able to understand the political economy of agriculture transformation, to work with different stakeholders. To be professional doesn't stop you from collaborating and building relationships and building synergy to pull resources into the sector. Lastly, and most importantly, as the AU identified, we should be able to account both for resources and the actions we take to transform the sector. Did they work? Did they fail? What did we learn? Can we spend more or should we spend less? We should answer those questions on every intervention that we make. And that going forward, we can be able to move the needle to address agricultural transformation and lift our people from poverty through agriculture.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Mambe. I think talking about us in the media, playing our part to advocate that agriculture be the fulcrum of our nation's development and transformation, providing jobs, and especially talking about food sufficiency as a country. We will try to play our part by doing so. And thank God for people like you who have devoted time, not only studying in the area, but at the same time sharing that knowledge with Liberians so that something can be done about agriculture. We will do our part to reach out to you always to have this conversation, because this conversation, if we continue to have it, chances are that the politicians and policy makers will see the reason to not pay the late service, but to start committing that 10% as we carry about the Mampuka Declaration, and also come up with an agricultural plan that will help Liberia make that progress that is needed. Thank you for coming, folks. In cyberspace, we can't thank you enough for coming to our program here. Yeah, I focus on Liberia. We educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. The state of Liberia's agricultural sector is abandoned, according to my guest, and I could not agree more. It is abandoned because the government is spending less than what it should have spent. The government is telling us, the foreigners, the international partners, the donors are spending money there. So why should we spend money there? It's like somebody telling you, my neighbor is feeding my son, even though it is my responsibility for my son to be fed, my daughter to be fed, but my neighbor is doing it. So I will take my money and put it in my pocket and use it for something else. That is what our government is telling us. So my guest could not have been spot on to say the sector is abandoned by our government. That is the state of Liberia's agricultural sector. Thank you for watching. The sun, we are all Liberians, will take us home. Bye-bye.
We are Liberia. Liberia is our home. Liberia people. Liberia.